We're coming from Studio 3, FM 95.4, Radio Cairo with Dr. Amr MABROUK and Muhammad at the control. And today we are celebrating a very special day, and that is the victory of the 6th of October. And we celebrate that by going through a very interesting book that has been produced commemorating 50th anniversary of 1973. The book is edited by Dr. Khalid Fahmy, who is a professor of history, and it is formed of 12 chapters almost, and they are dealing with a different perspective of 1973 October War. And I believe that this is really a very interesting book because it is trying to look at history from different perspectives and different points of view. So let's start after the break. Because it goes through a very important period of the history of Egypt, and that is the War of 1973. And Dr. Khalid Fahmy decided to make this book of 13 chapters with different 13 authors. Everybody of them has written from his own perspective and on his own perspective, and at the same time from his own point of view, a part of the history of 1973 war. But he started the book with a very interesting chapter, and this is of course the history and geographic history of Sinai by Professor Atif Mu'tamad. Professor Atif Mu'tamad is a professor of geography in the Faculty of Arts, and we have discussed one of his books about the geography of Egypt once before in our radio program. And of course, when we are talking about him, he looks back not just to geography, describing the variability of Sinai, the fact that it has three different geographic distributions, that it has this peninsula-like structure, that its main road that has been the road of entrance for a lot of invaders of Egypt or for the Egyptian army since the pharaohs as it goes towards the east. Well, this is the northern part of Sinai. And then there is the plateau and the mountains and the hills in the middle of Sinai, and then the south of Sinai, which is processed or sandwiched between the Gulf of Suez and the Gulf of Aqaba. And he has told us in this beautiful book how that the north part until the Crusaders' time was the route for the invaders and the route for the defenders. However, Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi decided that he should have a special road for in the middle of Sinai, avoiding the northern route and at the same time securing the passage of the army. And later on, this route that passed through the paths of Sinai, and these of course are Mitla and Al-Jad, it has passed through this pass and became the main route for pilgrimage. So this has been used as a sort of a route of pilgrimage until the year 1875. And even Ibrahim Pasha, the son of Muhammad Ali, has designated this road and rebuilt it and renewed it during his period of assisting reign of Muhammad Ali. So talking about this very special type of land, and this is Sinai, that its geography and geology is bits of that of Asia and bits of that of Africa, makes it very special. He said that this is being the main route of entrance to Egypt or exit for the Egyptian army to go or other armies to invade the Levant. He said that this particular geography that we have seen has made Sinai a real place of war. That they have said that he has said that it has been always at least 70 wars that happened on the land of Sinai, being the main gate, since the pharaohs, the Crusaders, the British, and during World War II and the Ottomans, all this through Sinai as the main pathway for Egypt, inside or outside from Egypt. So this makes it a very important perspective. And he said that for the first time, for 50 years, Egypt has not seen war, and this is because of what has happened with the treaty and of the Camp David Treaty, that Israel has not tried to pass into Egypt since 1973, and this is really a very important understanding of the war of 1973. So this chapter in particular by Atif Mu'tamid is really very interesting because it tells us an introduction of the specialty of Sinai and how it has metamorphosed through the years and how it has changed through the years, and definitely that's a very good introduction. So after the break, we'll talk about the attrition war, which in 1967 war, which were the introduction or the intro that happened to 1973 war. So stay tuned to us in Radio Cairo. So still listening to the world of info, the world of books, and 50 years of October War, a book that has been edited by Khalid Fahmy and others and written by others, and we are now celebrating the 52nd anniversary of the great victory of October War. The coming chapter was about the war itself. Definitely, President Sadat was a very cunning politician, and he has definitely done a great effort in order to start the war. The year before the war, he kept the Israelis on the edge, saying that he is going to fight and is going to start the war. And Israelis, whenever they believed in him, they decided to call for the reserves, which cost them a lot of money in the economic level in order to call the reserves and stop all the civil work. So Sadat, who has by this way didn't only fool the Israelis but fooled the West and fooled even the Egyptians, who were so desperate, thought that Sadat will never fight, Sadat will never start a war, and he's just bluffing and he will not do any war, or he's not going to try to restore the land. Sadat has made the initiative towards Israelis, the same initiative that Nasser tried to do in 1968-69, asking for the withdrawal of the Israeli forces from Sinai and building trust and confidence and peace. But like the Israelis did to Nasser, the same, he received a refuse from Golda Meir and Dayan, who said, no, we're not going to give this peace or dignified peace to Sadat. So Sadat knew from the very first moment, from early 1971, that the only solution is to make a war and try to restore as much as piece of land. How far the Russian arms that Egypt had, which was definitely less than the amount or less advanced than the technologically very highly advanced Israeli army had, and therefore made that the technical power and the strategic power is on the side of Israel more than the side of Egyptians. And yet Sadat said that he will try and push his luck as much as possible. So the plan was to cross the Suez Canal, which was almost an impossible, difficult terrain to cross and to conquer, and at the same time reach maximum by the time to the paths, because the air defense system cannot be transferred very easily, and it only covers about 20 to 25 kilometers in the Sinai. So if the Egyptian forces or the Egyptian tanks progress eastwards beyond the margin of the 20 or 25 kilometers, they will face severe destruction by the Israeli Air Force. And their hope is to engage with the Israeli tanks as early as possible, so that the Israeli Air Force cannot interfere, because then they will interfere easily without the Egyptian air defense protection. So he planned, and the details were made available for every soldier on the Suez Canal to know his role and his exact role. They had a lot of days, weeks, hours, and years of training, so that every person knew exactly what is his job to do on the day of the war. And therefore, on the second hour of the afternoon, after the afternoon, on 6th of October, after the arrangement and bilateral arrangement with Syria, the northern front, that is in Syria, and the Egyptian front, the southern front, started at the same time with the crossing of the Egyptian and the Syrian army to the both the truce lines, which was in Egypt, the Suez Canal. Once the Egyptians crossed the Suez Canal, the Israelis thought that they are going to burn them alive, but they found out that the napalm channels were not open, and it was closed by the special Egyptian forces. And also, in the first few hours, strong bridgeheads on the other side on the eastern side of the Suez Canal were made with depths of 5 to 8 kilometers. And in no time, the strong points and the strong defense garrisons of the Israeli garrisons along the Suez Canal started falling all in the hands of the Egyptian. The victory was very sharp, very well perceived by the whole world, and perceived as a great surprise for the Israelis, that even Golda Meir has just cried because she has omitted all the warning signs that she has had, and she has turned down all peace initiatives. So that's why she has said later on in one of her comments that I am not the same woman I was after 1973 war, and I have really felt very shaken, and this was very apparent in her teary eyes when she has received the Israeli prisoners of war in the airport when they came after the stoppage of the war. When we talk about the first few days of the great success of the Egyptian army to cross and to strengthen its sites on the eastern side, and at the same time to keep these bridgeheads, and they formed what they call the tactical stop at the 9th of October. From the 9th to the 14th October, Egypt tried to take a chance to advance its air defense system, but of course this was technically very difficult in these conditions. So there has remained the gridlock of how to extend the air defense so that the Egyptian forces could go further east. On the northern front, the Syrians have done great advance in the very few early 48 hours, and later on faced a lot of resistance from the Israeli sides and even counterattacks that has put a lot of pressure on the Syrian forces. So President Sadat felt obliged that he will have to cross the bridgeheads and go further east, trying to reach the paths. And unfortunately, there was a great tank war at that time, and therefore the Israelis found out that they can cross the Suez Canal and go to the western part of the Suez Canal and trying to make a sort of penetration with aims of taking up Ismailia and Suez, and this was under the leadership of Sharon. But this is a story to be told, because the second part of the war has seen the real strengths of the Egyptian people and the Egyptian army, how they faced this dangerous situation with great success. So
الكلمة بحكمة وفي الوقت المناسب. عاش عاش
عاش
عاش اللي قال، عاش اللي قال لازم نرجع أرضنا من كل غاصب. عاش عاشوا العرب اللي في ليلة أصبحوا ملايين تحارب.
عاش اللي قال، عاش اللي قال الكلمة بحكمة في الوقت المناسب. عاش اللي قال، عاش اللي قال لازم نرجع عقلنا من كل غاصب. عاشوا العرب اللي في ليلة أصبحوا ملايين تحارب.
عاش اللي قال للرجال عدلوا القنال. عاش اللي حول صبرنا حرب ونضال. عاش اللي قال يا مصرنا ما فيش محال. عاش اللي قال للرجال عدلوا القنال. عاش اللي حول صبرنا حرب ونضال. عاش اللي قال يا مصرنا ما فيش محال. عاش اللي قال للرجال عدلوا القنال. عاش اللي حول صبرنا حرب ونضال. عاش اللي قال يا مصرنا ما فيش محال. عاش ليك ابنك،
عاش عاش عاش
عاش اللي حبك،
عاش عاش عاش
عاش ليك ابنك،
عاش عاش عاش
عاش اللي حبك،
عاش عاش عاش
رد اعتبارك خلى نهارك، رد اعتبارك خلى نهارك احلى نهار، احلى نهار.
عاش اللي قال، عاش اللي قال الكلمة بحكمة في الوقت المناسب. عاش اللي قال، عاش اللي قال لازم نرجع عقلنا من كل غاصب. عاشوا العرب اللي في ليلة أصبحوا ملايين تحارب.
So, still listening to the world of info, the world of books, and today is celebrating the October War, the victory of October War, and reviewing an interesting book called The 50 Years on the Anniversary of October War. Editor-in-chief is Professor Khaled Fahmy. So, the second chapter of this book is dealing with the attrition war. Well, the attrition war is a war that happened since 1967 till 1970. And it's really a very important period of the history of Egypt and a real preparation of the war. What happened is that in 1967, which there were a defeat of the Egyptian forces in 1967 war in the 5th of June, and at the same time, of course, later on, the occupation of the Golan Heights and the occupation of the Western Bank, and this was a real disaster for Egypt. President Nasser felt obliged that he will have to resign his post and leave the presidency by taking the responsibility of this defeat. On the 9th of June, on the 8th of June, and on the 9th of June, after this speech, the Egyptians went to the street asking him to come back and to start preparing for the war. On the 11th of June, he has signed in the Lieutenant General Mohammed Fawzi to become the commander-in-chief of the Egyptian army and start organizing the Egyptian army. It's to be well noted that Nasser understood very much that this defeat that Egypt has had with the loss of Sinai the Israelis were not going to withdraw without a real war or a real fight. They have taken this huge piece of land of Egypt very easily, and therefore they will not give it up very easily, and the return of this has to be with war. And therefore the famous three no's that happened in the summit of the Arab summit in Khartoum, where there will be no surrender and of course no giving in and no peace until the land is restored. All these three no's by Nasser and the rest of the Arab world made him look forward to try to save the Egyptian morale and the Egyptian army, and starting build this army from scratch. The idea of building the army and involvement of the attrition war, Nasser decided that this war has to start as early as possible, because this will return the confidence of the Egyptians in themselves, and at the same time will act as a sort of formation of the idea of Egypt as a whole. So the attrition war had to start, and actually it started with, first of all, on the 14th of July, there was an air skirmish between the Egyptian planes, and Egypt was able to down 2 or 3 Israeli planes on that day. The trial of the Israelis to take up Bor Fuad in the Battle of Ras al-Ash, and they failed, was also a show of force and a show of the will of the Egyptians, when a small unit of Egyptian special forces were able to stand an outnumbered, although they've been outnumbered by the Israeli forces, then they stopped this attack and therefore kept Bor Fuad in the hands of the Egyptians, which is the only part of Sinai that was kept to Egypt after 1967. The sinking of the famous destroyer Eilat by the Egyptian Navy also was a start of the Navy war and the Navy attrition war. The actions of the Egyptian special forces commanded by the famous commander Ibrahim al-Rifai, all this has helped very much the Egyptians army to pull up their morale, to understand that what was taken by force will be regained by force, that the Egyptians will fight again, they will restore their dignity and their self-respect, and that's why the attrition war, with the number of casualties that were happening, and still the Egyptians had their morals and the courage to continue with this war. And of course we know that until 1969 and onwards, there has been, of course, the Israeli decision to use their air force, their strong air force, to bombard the depth of Egypt, and this made Abdel Nasser, or forced Abdel Nasser, to go to the Soviets and asking them to supply him with strong air defense, which they did. And in a very important, crucial part of history, from 1969 onwards till 1970, the Egyptian air defense bases started to be built rapidly by night, and acting as the Israelis once called them, the mushroom, like the mushroom plant, making up strong bases all over the Suez Canal line. And on the 30th of June 1970, the Israeli planes faced a great disaster by the falling of their planes after the air defense attacks on their planes when they started or tried to invade the airspace of Egypt. So after that, there was the acceptance by Nasser of the Rogers initiative and the stoppage, or the truce. And then during this truce, the Egyptian army, even after the death of Nasser, started to maintain and build up its forces for 3 continuous years until the date of 1973, October 6, when the battle started. So when we talk about this particular period, we go back to what Ali Azer, the famous general, the famous Ezer Weizmann, the famous Israeli general who said, we were defeated in the attrition war. We have lost a lot of casualties. We didn't win any piece of land in Egypt more. The casualties that we have done, or the destructions that we have done on the Egyptian side, we had even mutual damage in our forces and in our people. And therefore, it is for him considered to be, Ezer Weizmann, that this considered to be one of the first wars that Israel has ever lost. So this is a very interesting declaration from the famous Israeli generals. So after the break, we'll talk about 1973 war, October War. Following 1973 October War. So we stopped at how the Israelis crossed on the opposite side on the Western Bank, and their forces reached almost 300 tanks on the western side of the Suez Canal, and they thought that the Egyptian army will be doomed. Sharon had the orders to go north, trying to take up Ismailia city, and in no time his force was completely destroyed, obstructed, prevented from reaching Ismailia, and the Egyptian Second Army maintained its stronghold on the land, and the Israelis could not penetrate the Egyptian Second Army forces, whether this is in the Ismailia region on the Western Bank or on the eastern region at the Kantara Sharq. So the other armored division went down to Sinai, to Suez. They wanted to take up Suez city and to have a photo shoot of the Suez, which is resembling the Suez Canal, and therefore they will make sure that they will say we are fighting in Africa, like she used to say she wanted to do this Golda Meir. Well, actually, what happened is that in the Difference War, which is the soil, the plantable area around the lake of the Bitter Lakes, the forces that were there, the Egyptian forces, were the back forces, or the administrative forces of the fighting Third Army on the east. So the Israelis started chasing this back door of the Third Army, and by their chasing them, they didn't know that they were all going to the Suez city. So they have taken a piece of land that is really not easy to defend later on, which we'll see as we go through this talk. They pushed the Egyptian forces, the Egyptian backdoor part of administrative units went to carrying their own personal weapons and some of the RPGs and some of the lightly armed soldiers and officers. They went to Suez city. And so the Israelis thought that they will go to invade and take up the Suez city, and therefore have a very strong propaganda about this. What happened is that once they reached Suez, they thought that it's an easy piece of cake. And the two armored columns of armored tanks and cars was not only stopped in the Suez streets, but completely destroyed, with the loss of soldiers in this area and the number of casualties, even depending on the Israelis' broadcast, were huge, that the Israelis had to withdraw from the Suez city. So suddenly they were trapped in the Difference War. They are circulating the Suez Canal and circulating the Egyptian Third Army, but their main forces actually has been circulated by the Egyptian army, which is getting stronger by the minute, because not only the Egyptian tanks that were in the reserves were taking part, we have received as well 100 tanks from Algiers and another 100 tanks from Yugoslavia. So the number of tanks on the western bank, the Egyptian tanks, were almost 400 in no time, while the Israeli tanks were only reduced, their number were reduced to 300. So it could have been a real stressful situation for the Israelis. There started from the ceasefire on the 24th of October, after the tide of the Israeli attack started to dwindle and go down, the Israeli forces, the United Nations forces, started reaching the points of contact between the Egyptian forces and the Israeli forces to separate in between them. And then they started the Egyptian hidden attrition war. Every day the Egyptian army would attack a unit, an Israeli unit, and then will present an apology for the United Nations forces, peacekeeping forces, claiming that it was somebody irresponsible who made this attack, and he will be definitely court-martialed. The Israelis found themselves until the mid-January losing every day casualties and soldiers who are feeling that they don't have any thing that prevents the Egyptians from going in their night raids, killing or injuring their soldiers or destroying their equipment. And it was very well documented that after the withdrawal of Israelis, the camps that the Israelis were left in was full of graffiti written on it, "I want to go home," or "we don't want to die here," and things like that. The morals has started to get down very easily with the fact that the number of Egyptians surrounding them. There could have been a real war that would have led to a lot of casualties in the Israelis at that time. So when we talk about the 101 disengagement agreement which happened between Egyptian and Israeli forces under the supervision of the United Nations, we find out that the Israelis, for the first and maybe the last time, have withdrew from the western bank of the Suez Canal, because they knew that this was a very desperate situation, and the disengagement went on that the Egyptian forces have occupied not only the whole of the West Bank, and it's returned under the authority of Egyptians, and they kept the 30 kilometers that they have taken up of Sinai, waiting for the initiative that later on President Sadat has done. So when we talk about this war and how it ended, we always say definitely this was a victory for Egypt, and definitely what happened has really increased the morals and improved the morals of Egyptians, and they knew that they can do anything. So this is how it went. So the rest of the book goes to deal with certain nice chapters that we're going to discuss after the break.
إن القوات المسلحة المصرية قامت بمعجزة على أي مقياس عسكري.
بسم الله بسم الله أزين مخطط بسم الله بسم الله بسم الله الله أكبر بسم الله بسم الله بسم الله أزين مخطط بسم الله بسم الله نصرك بلدنا بسم الله بسم الله بإيدين ولادنا بسم الله بسم الله نصرك بلدنا بسم الله بسم الله بإيدين ولادنا بسم الله بسم الله وأذان عمتنا بسم الله بسم الله بيحيي جهاتنا بسم الله بسم الله وأذان عمتنا بسم الله بسم الله بيحيي جهاتنا بسم الله بسم الله الله أكبر أذن وكبر الله أكبر أذن وكبر وقول يا رب النصر تكبر بسم الله الله أكبر بسم الله بسم الله بسم الله أذن وكبر بسم الله بسم الله بسم الله الله أكبر بسم الله بسم الله بسم الله أزين وكبر بسم الله بسم الله بذبحنا مصر بسم الله بسم الله تقريب النصر بسم الله بسم الله بذبحنا مصر بسم الله بسم الله تقريب النصر بسم الله بسم الله وجنود الشعب بسم الله بسم الله بالخط الصعب بسم الله بسم الله وجنود الشعب بسم الله بسم الله بالخط الصعب بسم الله بسم الله الله أكبر أذن وكبر الله أكبر أذن وكبر وقول يا رب النصر تكبر بسم الله الله أكبر بسم الله بسم الله بسم الله أذن وكبر بسم الله بسم الله بسم الله الله أكبر بسم الله بسم الله بسم الله أذن وكبر بسم الله بسم الله سينا يا سينا بسم الله بسم الله أدينا عدينا بسم الله بسم الله سينا يا سينا بسم الله بسم الله أدينا عدينا بسم الله بسم الله بحيروا علينا بسم الله بسم الله جنود قاعدينا بسم الله بسم الله بحيروا علينا بسم الله بسم الله جنود قاعدينا بسم الله بسم الله الله أكبر أذن وكبر الله أكبر أذن وكبر يا رب النصر تكبر بسم الله الله أكبر بسم الله بسم الله بسم الله أذن وكبر بسم الله بسم الله بسم الله الله أكبر بسم الله
So this is the world of info, and this is the world of books, and we're talking about a very interesting book, 50 years on October War, and definitely this chapter is really very dear to me. It's written by an author who is a doctor in history and political science, and her name is Reem Naguib, and she is writing about the memoirs of her father on the front. Her father was a fresh graduate of the Faculty of Engineering, Mechanical Engineering, and he has had his job in one of the factories in the year 1967. With the war of 1967 and the loss of the land, he found that he was called up for duty. And when he went to serve in the reserve forces of the Egyptian Faculty of or Academy of Reserve Officers, he found that they asked him to come back in 6 or 7 months because already the academy is full of cadets. So he decided that he would not wait. So he enrolled as a volunteer officer in the Egyptian engineering course. And he was enlisted as an officer in the army and got his commission in 6 months after graduating from the faculty of from the Academy of Engineering, military engineers. And he was sent directly to the front, where he stayed from 1967 till 1974 or 75. And he told his daughter in an interview about his experience in 1967 onwards. A very close look on a young officer who has seen the war through the worst side of it as a young officer, responsible for a lot of soldiers. Some of them lost their lives in the different types of raids that happened, and at the same time he was involved in taking care of his soldiers, and involved in the trying to maintain and build and keep strong the basis of the air defense. His kindness towards his soldiers, and how he felt very close to them, and how they felt him, that they were very close to him, that during the war when he was injured, they all wanted to stay with him and took him to the hospital and wanted to take care of him, but he was sent to the back of the in a hospital in Cairo, and in 2 or 3 days he was treated, and he decided to go back to serve with his colleagues and his soldiers, not to leave them. And of course, by that time they were under siege during the Suez time, so he was sent to another unit where he stayed with the rest of the units, and when the withdrawal of the Israelis happened, he had his reunion with some of his soldiers who stayed alive after the war. So this is a very emotional chapter. It deals with the feelings and emotions of a young officer, his relation with his colleagues, with the soldiers he had, and with his senior commanders, and how he was treated in the hospital, and how when Mrs. Sadat visited the hospital and asked him, "Do you need anything?" he said, "I have everything." He was not self-centered. He was very keen to go back to the field, very keen to go back to see his soldiers and his officers and his colleagues, and at the same time felt the urge and need to stay and serve his colleagues and his country. This emotional chapter carries the young generation that were enrolled in the army at the age of 21 and left the army many years later. And this gives us an idea of the type of people who served in the army. He has given also a great tribute to the Egyptian civilians who worked in building the air defense bases, and how a lot of them have died under the Israeli air raids, and yet they kept coming again, their colleagues, and they kept on trying to build these air defense bases that in the end Moshe Dayan called them the mushrooms on the western bank of the Suez Canal. This is an interesting chapter. And the chapter to follow is another interesting one, because it talks about a really very dear city to us. It talks about Suez, and he is trying to tell us, the author, how Suez was able to stand the attack of the Israeli forces, how Suez survived this, and how the civilians have taken a share in defending of the city in this attack that failed, and therefore maintained the integrity and the safety for the city until the disengagement. So when we talk about this really interesting book, we have to talk about it in details, because this is a period that is very dear to us. It's the victory that helped the Egyptians to regain their confidence in themselves, helped the Egyptians to have the negotiations later on built on the power of the disengagement, by the fact that there was strong cards on the Egyptian side when dealing with the Israelis, and that's why they left the Western Bank. And later on, when President Sadat approached the peace initiative, he approached to it from a site of strength, not from a site of weakness. And the history, or the military history of the Egyptian army in 1973 still lives in the Egyptian army of today, and therefore it is always taught in the military academy of the Egyptian military academies, the lessons learned from 1973 war, the strength of the morals and the love of the country that these older generations have transferred and transmitted to the younger and the new generations that are carrying the flag nowadays. So when we talk about the 1973 war, we definitely talk about dear days, and dear days that definitely can be related to the Egyptians of today. So an interesting book that we have talked about, and this is 50 years on the October War, and days to remember with pride and love the October victory of 1973. So with this we come to the end of the World of Info. My name is Dr. Amr MABROuk. Dua Muhammad was at the control. Please stay tuned always to Radio Cairo, and we'll see you the same time, same station next week. And have a good weekend.